Oppressor's End. Thorvek pressed his full weight onto the witch, who lay on the alley's rough ground. He pinned the psyker's arms beneath his knees and smothered the man's mouth so that no curses could be spat. From the alley's mouth, Holland looked back nervously. Thorvek muttered a prayer, hurried but heartfelt, before swiftly drawing a blessed dagger across the man's thick neck. The cut was clean, efficiently made, and blood welled out immediately. It flowed over the man's neck and down the alley, before pooling in a stinking, litter-choked drain that was already buzzing with cryptilids. The witch's convulsions ceased, with a final spurt of bloody froth that covered Thorvek's apron. He swore silently. Evidence. They had prepared for this problem, but it was still something Thorvek could have avoided. If the Imperial lapdog now dead beneath him hadn't been so damned strong, he could have covered his throat as he planned. Goethe would deal with it. Pantomime, bless her. She was incredibly skilled in swiftly excising incriminating stains and dyes out of the most impliable fabric. So skilled, in fact, that senior leaders from other cells of the Mind Cord, even beyond Thorvek's home city of Grezum, begged for her training as often as secrecy would allow. Home city. Not for long, he thought. Not now that salvation was on its way. It meant a better life for all of the faithful of the cult of the Mind Cord, not least for Thorvek, for kind-eyed Goethe, and for the small star angel she was swiftly bearing to term. At the alley's end, Holland shifted incessantly from foot to foot. The lookout was constantly on edge, it seemed, at least when not in the pastor's presence. Holland's eyes and ears were the best in the cell, though. Working out on the slag fields on the outskirts of Grezum meant his eyesight and hearing were incredibly sharp. They had to be, for all sorts of predatory lice stalked the slag. "Are you done?" hissed back Thorvek, eager to get out of such an enclosed space. Thorvek swiftly signed for the lookout to wait. He placed the tip of the blessed dagger onto the psyker's forehead, still warm and caped in grimy sweat, and drew a wafer-thin rag of filthy cloth from his overall. Thorvek consulted the simple image scratched in charcoal on the rag, and began to carve an identical one on the witch's head. He made sure that the cuts were ragged, pressing hard to incise the skull beneath, just as the pastor had instructed. Soon the bloody shape of an eye was riven into the psyker's smooth forehead. The red eye mirrored the chalked oculus that Grezum's governor had scrawled on the backs of rounded-up psykers as his troops paraded them on the way to the black camps. More importantly, bloodily carved like this, and with a cleanly slit throat, the mark bore all the signs on recent vigilante attacks on those bearing even a whiff of sorcery about them. Looking at his work, Thorvek instinctively rubbed his own forehead in the same spot, massaging the tiredness he felt over the shallow, bony ridges there. The 5 sacred ridges were his inheritance, dating all the way back to when the Serena Paternoster arrived as the emissary of the Starchild. Thorvek felt happy, despite the dull ache. Everything was as the pastor had wished, expressed in the man's mellow voice. Other cells had rather outlandish names for the statuesque man, Cognosk or Viapater, and to Holland he was always the pastor, but Thorvek had been personally invited to address him as the Magus. The Magus, always so admirably in touch with dealings around the city, had told Thorvek and Holland how the governor's expanding corps of witch-finders were equipped with some new off-world tech. The governor had told his councillors that he had negotiated a pact with the Adeptus Mechanicus, but the devices looked like no work of the tech priests. They were smooth, subtly carved, like nothing the Magus's Mind Cord contacts had seen before. These psi-hunting bands of armoured agents were trawling dangerous areas of Grezum in 50-strong gangs, often followed by a mob of hate-filled civilians. Thorvek could sympathise, hating witches intensely. Many loyal brothers and sisters of the Mind Cord's scattered cells had joined these hunts, helping their fellow Grezi root out the foulness, even if the rest were unbelievers. Yet, imagine such an unthinking mob, the Magus had mused, witnessing the simple and honest miracle gifted to the cult of the Mind Cord. What then? These witch-finders too, the oppressors' tools that they were, would they understand? Everything the Serena Paternoster had done to save them would be in vain. The Star Children might even turn aside from this world in shame. The Magus had spoken sadly of his worry, and Thorvek had ached to do something to help him. Even the thought of that brief meeting with the Magus warmed Thorvek through. Since their earliest boyish memory of a blessing at the man's hand, Thorvek had seen the guiding light of the cult only a handful of times in person. Yet often did a mental image of the Magus come to mind during vital work for the cult, sealing uniforms, monitoring sentry patterns, and reconnoitering possible new sanctums. All were carried out with the reassuring presence of the Magus's eyes at the back of his mind. Thorvek had jokingly told himself the Magus watched Thorvek's dealings through his servant's eyes. Yet with the miracles the man wrought, who was Thorvek to say that that wasn't exactly what had occurred? Psykers, Thorvek thought bitterly. The tyrannical overlords of Grezum sought to buy the docile obedience of its citizens by hunting the witches down, all the while pampering their pet sorcerers. There had been so many more purges recently, but with the oppressors' increased trawls, with witchfinders, and their off-world tech, came the increased risk of the security of the Mind Cord cells. It was a blessing, then. A portent, the Magus had called it, that the cult of the Mind Cord had been blessed with so many workers of simple miracles. It was a sign. After all these generations of preparation, it was the sign. "Come on," he called sharply to Holland. The lookout ran to where they had dumped the Psyker's body, and together they wove into the darkness of crumbling alleys. Thorvek liked the wiry man, who was favoured with a violet cast, his hairline just about concealed. "I hate this place," Holland spat. "Why do we have to drag that witch all the way out here? This is King Jaren's patch. Even slaggers like me know that. That old smuggler's had his forces killed before now. He wouldn't think twice if he caught us here." "That's the point. You trust the Magus, the pastor, don't you?" Holland looked appalled. "Yes, of course You know I do. Think about it. The cult catch that off-world Imperial witch sniffing around the pastor's private chambers, right? That filthy mind spy gets found here shanked by Vigis. Now that we've got loyalty in the mobs, we'll make sure he's discovered by the witchfinders. But King Jaren isn't some lowlife the governor can walk over. The witchfinders tramp here, there'll be war." "Yeah, there will." Thorvek grinned, and slapped his friend's lumpen back as he saw realization dawn. "It's happening, Hall. In our lifetime, it's finally happening. Their presses will be slaughtered." "Patermine," Holland breathed. He smiled in ecstasy, pointed yellow teeth gleaming. Less than a week later, Grezum burned. To Thorvek's awe, the Serena Paternoster's tireless agents across the entire continent had revealed their hand as one united people. Grezum convulsed in the throes of a war between the city governor and the huge resources of King Jaren's criminal under-empire. Their former backroom agreement swept aside in blood. The city didn't blaze alone. From his vantage point at a high window of a derelict factorum, Thorvek saw at least 3 satellite cities in flames. How he wished his grandfather could have laid his lidless eyes on the scene and known this moment. Below Thorvek, the briefest of violet spark flared. Ascension hour had come at last. His perfectly executed luring of the murdered Imperial investigator had earned Thorvek high praise. Now he led what would be the cult's first open blow against the Empressor. Thorvek stalked down through the abandoned factorum, and like oily shadows, the fighters of his cell slipped along in his wake. By the time they poured silently out of a rear loading bay, almost 30 dedicated warriors and sisters of the cult of Mind Cord crept alongside Thorvek. In the twilight, greasy rain soaked them. They looked ragged, their grime-smeared surf coveralls layered over stolen flak jackets. The bolt-action rifles, brutalist autoguns, and even antique hunting arquebuses were born in a mismatch of firepower. They were nothing like the recent propaganda vids spewed by the governor. with his honor guard at practice ranges in neatly pressed uniforms firing their new Gresam pattern plasma long rifles. Stolen vidlogs from the governor's chambers had also shown him cajoling the city's wealthy with tales of new backers. He jabbered off better weapons for the city-state's militias, off-world investment and global unity. Thorvek's target was an outer defense post of the city militia. Its unimportance made it the ideal mark. They didn't yet have anyone inside this particular post. Its clique of politicized nepotists had proven hard to infiltrate. But there were always ways to overcome any problem, as the Megas told him. Crouching near the gate in its outer perimeter, Thorvek signaled. Sister Regan, her angelic purple features hidden beneath a militia helmet, entered her passcard in the brass reader. With gloved digits he punched on the code whose acquisition had cost an unbelieving colleague his life. She casually covered the locking mechanism as she passed through, letting the heavy gate close behind her as she walked with her characteristic awkwardness to the post's door. Regan looked up openly at the skull-faced picked thief above the door. Regan knew from her own shift at her other post that the images it took were monitored, as those inside would be trying to raise her on a vox frequently keyed solely to this post. She theatrically tapped the side of her enclosed helm, beautifully conveying abject and tired frustration, as well as a supposedly broken vox bead. After a moment, the defense post's portal opened. Thorvek felt events slow. 2 militia guards came out to remonstrate with Regan. They were strained, on edge and without sleep. The internecine city war hadn't yet reached this area, but the guards had been posted on endless shifts without hope of relief. The bigger of the guards managed 2 shouted invectives before Regan brought her stub gun up. The guard's face disappeared in a roar of heavy slugs, and the back of his helmet erupted in a shower of blood, brain matter, and sharp shards of bone. The other guard didn't turn and flee, surprising Thorvek, but the woman was doomed nonetheless. In a tide of bodies, Thorvek's cellkin poured through the gate that Regan's inserted scramble emitter had prevented from locking. The guard shot Regan with a kind of slim-nosed plasma pistol that Thorvek didn't recognize, but then took too long fumbling for a vox bead contact and was ripped apart by the Mind Core's devoted liberators. Another of Thorvek's squad scooped up the pass card from Regan's dead hand without so much as a glance at her. She was a blessed martyr, but she would be reincarnated with all the others when the Star Child arrived. Her actions would allow them to sever this post's connections with the capital, draw whatever forces the governor could spare out here to the lonely fringe, and leave the entire city at the mercy of the Mind Cord waiting in the ancient sewers beneath. The passcard opened the defense's portals, and Thorvek's squad poured a hail of shot inside. 2 of his fighters were hit by immediate return fire, firing streams of blue plasma torching them. The smell of the warriors' burning flesh washed over the fighters who followed, stampeding over their dying cellkin with hisses and shouts. Inside the interconnected command rooms, signal housing, armories and billets, the savage fighting was far closer than Thorvek had anticipated. The 20 or so sleep-deprived guards should have been swarmed in moments. Instead, they braced themselves around the gantries, covering each other in a way that Thorvek had never seen before. Many more zealous cult fighters fell to the guards' fire, chests and heads flash burning in the volleys of plasma pulses. The guards' unified cohesion could not save them, though. Not against such determined liberators as Thorvek's. His brothers and sisters poured rattling auto-fire into the post's guards, tore out throats with angel-touched talons, and drove knives into eyes, hearts and lungs again and again. Barely 10 of Thorvek's warriors survived, and he could not share their joyous celebrations at finally having overcome collaborators of the oppressor. Thorvek's mind churned with everything that was wrong inside the defense post. The guards had used the oddly proportioned plasma weaponry meant to be so new it was only held by the governor's honor guard. This was an outer defense post manned by dregs, yet they fought with selfless cohesion. What then the governor's own Praetorians? A heretical thought surfaced. Had the cult of the Mind Cord underestimated the oppressors? A Saint chapbook stuck out of the breast pocket of the guard at his feet, above which blood continued to flow from the ragged stump of the man's neck. Thorvek flicked through its yellow pages, trying to order his thoughts. There is a unity to which we can all belong, he read. A higher purpose, a greater good. In Thorvek's mind, the Magus's dark eyes opened. Fifth Sphere Expansion Campaign Log, Rota 257. We cannot fail. We represent the hope of our people, indeed, the hope of the greater good. We are the tip of the spear, the pioneers. We have gone where no Tau thought possible. We are on the brink of deadlock. Implacable, ignorant, and predatory foes stood at every turn, but we were true to our cause. With the tenacity and audaciousness that characterizes our race, we persevered. Those of the fourth sphere were truly the bravest. What they must have endured, what risks they took, to then emerge alone in the galactic wilderness, to maintain order, to build what would be our stepping stone into the Nemya Atoll, despite not knowing whether they would ever hear from their kin again. It took immeasurable courage and conviction. This should be the envy of us all. But they have changed. The extent of their sacrifice and what it has done to them is difficult to contemplate, but I cannot condone their actions. End recording. The Hairfoss Containment. Hairfoss was in the grip of rebellion. The Great Rift had brought panic and fear, its ominous presence in the skies shattering the population's sense of safety. All contact with the wider Imperium was lost, though the planet's governor, Zula Hatiar, had no reason to believe that she would not continue to meet her tithe requirements. Densely populated Hairfoss was a mining world in the Pecan system. A key planet in the region, it had produced vast quantities of promethium and metals for use in munitions for thousands of years. Like many Imperial worlds, its population had suffered terribly since the Great Rift's emergence. In their fright, many of Hairfoss's people had turned to firebrands and demagogues, whose powerful message of survival through change appeared to offer the security the Imperium could not. Governor Hatiar's planetary defense regiments were faced with rapidly increasing outbreaks of mutation and a multitude of cults devoted to what they called the One-Eyed Liege. One such cult, the followers of the Red Monarch, were responsible for dozens of atrocities, most notoriously the Eusebia Tunnel collapse, which claimed over 30,000 lives. Meanwhile, the Cyclopeans, a cult whose members were noted for ritually putting out one of their own eyes in honor of their deity, launched an attack on the Calixtos spaceport, delaying promethium exports by several weeks. Freak events described by eyewitnesses as heretical sorcery and witchcraft became more common. The Lascari mine massacre, the Muliga refinery inferno, and the insanity of Hab Block 27A were but a handful of instances in an ever-growing list of malign events. When the black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica failed to arrive according to their schedule, Hairfoss was left with thousands of dangerous psychers in its custody. This was seen as an opportunity by the increasingly desperate governor, however. Against advice from her counselors, Zula Hatiar offered freedom to some of the psychers in exchange for their help in seeking out mutants and rogue witches. Those that did not comply, willingly or otherwise, were culled. The initial success of this campaign surprised even Governor Hatiar. The followers of the Red Monarch were hunted down and destroyed by 4 regiments of Hephosian phalanxeri in the dense hab blocks of Zonora City's southwest district. The mutants of Titanium Shaft 67 were burned out by the Kachjan 99th Land Sharks, and the 343rd Devil Hunters were temporarily stationed on the planet to provide jungle warfare training for the Hephosian regiments. The undersea mines of the Anthemion Trench were the site of fierce fighting between the cult of Chalconides and more than 30 companies of the Hephosian Tritons. Renowned combat aquanauts, the Tritons restored the mines to full function in a matter of weeks, leaving no heretic alive. Following the success of her campaign up to that point, when a violently migrating mutant colony of hundreds of thousands was identified in the vast tunnel complexes beneath the Latinian subcontinent, Hatiar was convinced the victory was inevitable. Infantry from 20 Hephosian Phalanxeri regiments were dispatched, alongside 7 regiments of Hephosian Klibernari, replete with squadrons of thundering Leman Russ battle tanks, flame-belching hellhounds and striding sentinels. A dozen allied regiments from other worlds were also allocated to what was expected to be a glorious battle. The braying mutants encountered by the combined Imperial forces were swiftly crushed, ground beneath armoured tracks or cut down by waves of accurate las and heavy bolter fire. Nests and homesteads were purged with gouts of burning promethium or virulent flesh-melting toxins. However, soon the mutants' great numbers began to tell, and they pushed back. The sounds of battle filled tunnels of every kind, from those so narrow the guardsmen could only walk them single file, to those wide enough for a company of Leman Russ tanks to drive through abreast. Vox lines were flooded with the screams of guardsmen being shredded by savage creatures, or tank crews crying for aid as their vehicles were swamped with deluges of noxious vomit. The clashes reached their peak intensity in the junctions where various tunnels met, amongst abandoned way stations and checkpoints. It was here, too, that the nature of the war on Herefrost changed completely, and Governor Hatiar learned just why the mutants fought with such unbridled savagery. They were fleeing something else, something worse than the Astra Militarum forces that came to destroy them. Others dwelled in Latinion's nightmarish underworld, and they too sought the destruction of the mutants so they could claim the planet for themselves. These other cults had bided their time, growing their strength with a patience and diligence unmatched by the mutants the Hephosian forces had faced so far. The first Imperial troops to encounter this new threat identified weaponized mining vehicles and Achilles Ridge Runners advancing at speed, its humanoid crew unleashing torrents of ammunition from rapid-firing weapons as they ran down those too slow to escape them. This unexpected foe attacked the Imperial forces immediately, catching them totally by surprise. Expecting a swift victory against an ill-disciplined enemy, Herefrost's troops found themselves on the defensive against a highly organized and well-equipped force. Infantry platoons were encircled and outflanked by foes mounted on Atalan jackals before being pounced on by clawed, multi-limbed horrors clad in well-worn mining gear. Sentinel squadrons were beset by heavily muscled monstrosities that ripped open cockpits and tore apart the pilots. Conflicting reports claimed that this new foe was made up of traitors, xenos, or new strains of mutants. Some Imperial officers were in a position to rally their troops in time and take some initiative. The Bastion Breakers, Leman Russ Demolisher Company, charged head-on into the onslaught of Goliath rock grinders. Such bravery cost the lives of all the tank crews, but stymied an assault that could have destroyed much of the 12th Ryatov Grenadiers' 5th and 6th Companies. The 81st Hephosian Klibernari's 2nd Hellhound Company raced at high speed to relieve trapped Bukuni Hearthguard, striking with such fury that not only were their allies rescued, but hundreds of cultists were incinerated by burning promethium. Some of these cultists were even successfully captured, though those that achieved this incredible feat were executed for unlawful contact with foes of the Imperium after their captives were taken away. Within a matter of hours the battle was over. The new enemy had slunk away and retreated despite their significant battlefield advantages. The mutant colony had indeed been destroyed, but thousands of Imperial troops were also slain, their broken bodies scattered over multiple battlefields. Hundreds of tank wrecks burned, the smog poisoning the thin, subterranean air. Governor Hatiar, denied her swift and malevolent victory, was shaken. Against all military advice, she withdrew her surviving troops rather than ordering a pursuit, hoping this new foe would never be encountered again. Her regiments had scared them off. They would surely not return. But return they did. Simultaneous uprisings broke out across Herefrost, each one with similar attributes. Repurposed civilian vehicles loaded with weaponry, many-limbed monsters with claws and wicked blades, and humanoid warriors clad in battered mining attire and wielding crude weapons. There was another common thread, in that all focused particular attention on the planet's spaceports, in particular Eleuterio, Hephaestus' largest. Hatiar had little idea what kind of intelligence drove these creatures, but even a fool could see that their actions were no coincidence. They sought to escape. Hatiar was determined that this would not happen, committing her generals to ensuring that the spaceports held. She could not risk the wider Imperium learning of what horrors her planet harbored and allowed to fester in its depths. Eleuterio was the size of a city. Its bustling docks supported thousands of commercial and military spacecraft, and heaved with servitors, crews going about vital onshore business, and mysterious agents of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Vast landing pads sat amid storehouses packed with supplies ready to be dispatched off-world. Colossal fuel tanks kept the engines of Imperial trade running. Hab blocks for workers were everywhere, amongst workshops where machinery ceaselessly groaned, banged, and clanked. But the sounds of industry swiftly changed to sounds of battle. Alien chants and screeches met the battle oaths of Imperial priests and soldiery, and the air filled with the crack of lasguns, the roar of cannons, and the chug of repeating guns. A place of commerce and civility had become one of war, where once merchants had discussed at length the finer details of their trading agreements. Imperial soldiers now patrolled, seeking to draw out their elusive foe. Where once goods were piled high, gene-stealer occultists now hid, burrowed, and made their lairs. Vicious firefights broke out daily, and the smell of industry was placed with the stench of rotting flesh. The insidious creatures laced many corridors with traps and used every known guerrilla tactic. Patrols were ambushed and destroyed, guardsmen ripped to shreds by bestial claws, and armored columns fell into well-disguised tank traps filled with anti-armor mines. Infantry platoons reported being assaulted from all sides at once, many of them caught in deadly autogun crossfires, even as purple-skinned monsters rushed to tear them limb from limb. Others came under assault for scant minutes before their attackers broke off completely and disappeared, leaving no trace. Officer after officer was assassinated, their bodies found bearing hideous blade wounds or pistol shots to the head. Mines and other explosive devices became as prolific as the blood-sucking flies in the Leont marshlands, and thousands upon thousands of soldiers lost limbs to them. Areas swept clear of explosives were often found riddled with them again only days later, and without the oratory and zealotry of military priests and commissars, many of Heer Force's senior officers expected their soldiers' morale to collapse beyond recovery. A rediscovery of faith. The Tau first came to Heer Force at the height of the fighting against the Genestealer cult uprisings, making the diplomatic overtures to Governor Hatiar directly. They explained that they were of the Water caste, one of 5 castes that made up their race. They identified Heer Force's new threat as the Genestealer cults, explaining in detail how the Tau had engaged them on other worlds, and how they wished to form a partnership with Imperial governors to defeat this most terrible threat. At this time, Hatiar was desperate. Everything she had ever known appeared to be crashing down around her, and her armies were nearly bled dry by myriad foes. The stars of the night skies had changed beyond all recognition. The Imperium was out of reach. The Xenos' proposal was a tempting one. They spoke persuasively, offering the victory, peace, and prosperity Hatiar desired so much. She questioned what the Imperium had ever done for her, what it was doing for her now. She was prepared to acquiesce to their offer when tidings were brought to her from an Imperial priest who had miraculously survived a terrific battle. The priest spoke of a Xenos foe that fought with advanced weaponry while clad in enormous warsuits. They had killed Imperial soldiery and Genestealer cults with equal impunity. Upon hearing this, Hatiar spurned the Tau's offer of allegiance, stating emphatically that her loyalty to the Emperor was second to nothing, and that she was a woman without price. She decried the duplicity of aliens and vowed that all would be wiped from the face of Heer Force. Hatia saw the priest's survival and message as a sign from the Emperor himself. Her faith was restored, and she took to directing the campaign for Herefors with renewed vigour. The governor's forces had advantages of their own, however. With the wealth of the planet behind them, they were able to bring formidable numbers and firepower to bear. Hatiar's generals sought to capitalize on this and draw the enemy into open battle, presenting them with weak forces acting as lures. When they attacked infantry companies placed deliberately as bait, whole gene cycles were wiped out by squadrons of roaring hellhounds and deadly Valkyrie gunships. The Herefosians mobilized forces large enough to sweep whole swathes of Eltirio in gigantic pincer movements. Infantry regiments and implacable armored companies closed on certain areas of the spaceport like a vice, leaving their enemies no escape. Though these battles resulted in enormous losses for Hatiar's forces, as the cultists fought for their survival like frenzied, caged animals, the strategy's overall effectiveness was hard to deny. Once it had been fully implemented, it would only be a matter of time before Eleuterio fell. The fighting remained arduous nonetheless. Blade-limbed Xenos cultists inflicted appalling damage, tearing apart Imperial infantry with frightening ease before they were put down. Hulking brutes wielding immense picks and hammers shrugged off all but the heaviest weapons fire as they crushed their enemies to pulp. An entire Thaxorilian guard regiment even fell to the Xenos taint, turning on their allies in a terrible surprise attack. It took months of grueling fighting to finally destroy them, at which time other units also had to be purged. The same corruption had somehow spread from the cultists to thousands of Imperial troops. Nevertheless, these were all but minor setbacks. The cultists had nowhere left to run. Eleuterio was eventually judged secure, though sporadic fighting continued for months after the official declaration of victory. The port itself was now little more than a blasted ruin, many of the ships it had docked reduced to slag or barely valuable for scrap. Even with no other port under attack, it was doubtful that Herefors would be able to meet its tithe requirements for years. But Hatiar was optimistic. If they had won here, they could win elsewhere. They had been out of contact with the wider Imperium for years, and the governor believed that, if this state of affairs continued, she would be able to rebuild and reproduce, and produce enough resources to meet any requirements once contact was re-established. Just as Hatiar's first smile for many months appeared on her face, she received word. A Xenos fleet approached. It was the Tau. The Killing Creed. I am watched by gargoyles as I ready myself to kill. Their stone eyes stare unblinking as I stretch each muscle in turn with slow deliberation. They observe as I bring my breathing back to normal and feel my heartbeat quicken in my chest. They have watched me for 16 days, and in all that time I have moved barely more than they. Rains have come and gone, slicking their stone hides and the matte black sin skin of my body glove. Thunder has boomed overhead, and lightning flashed, its vicious glare muted by the envirobaffles of my spy mask, so that I have been barely more aware of nature's fury than were my stone companions. They care nothing for the world around me, and neither do I. We are as kin. Now, though, our kinship must end. Their indifference to the teeming human populace can continue, but I do not have that luxury. If the biochoral auspex is in my rig are correct, and they are always correct, then my business with the people of this world is about to begin in earnest. 352 feet below me, 76 feet to my left. He is there. Cardiospectral resonance feeds bring me his distinct heartbeat, sifted from amongst hundreds of thousands. There is the barely perceptible arrhythmia that indicates a human body sustained beyond its natural span by repeated rejuvenate treatments. The minute weakness of the mitral valve left by a childhood case of sanguinori. A youth of less lavish means would not have survived so merciless a disease. Cardinal Zhenguai's family were willing to expend prodigious resources to ensure their progeny's survival. They had plans for him, ambitions. I race slowly, smoothly, the motion as liquid as molten quicksilver, and conducted over 3 full minutes so as to confound motion detection auspices. Just as slowly, I bring my Excitus long rifle up to my shoulder and allow my spy mark's machine spirit to commune with that of my weapon. They are old allies, these spirits. They kill well together. Sometimes, during the quiet weeks of long waiting from one mark to another, I find myself wondering whether I am merely the means of locomotion by which my weaponry and war gear stalk their prey. Such thoughts flirt with heresy, of course. My mind, body, and soul have been honed to perfection through the decades-long efforts of the Vindicar Temple. I am a living weapon of the Officio Assassinorum, as far superior to the human cattle as they are to the groks they farm, or the parasites they burn from the holds of their spacecraft. I do not require my weapons or war gear to kill. Their machine spirits are subservient to my will, as all machines must always be subservient to the will of humankind. I give my long rifle agency. I direct my spy mask's focus. Without me, they are nothing. Yet with them, I am greater and more perilous than I would be without. I put aside such mental irrelevancies, snuffing out the random sparks of undisciplined consciousness one by one, as I narrow my focus upon my mark. It is always this way after a long period of mental hibernation. I stare down from this gargoyle's roost and see the petitioners packing the square of holy address. They wait for Cardinal Zhenguai to speak. Thousands upon thousands of secondary presences crush in between the looming shoulders of the Cathedral Redemptor Immorti until it seems they might trample one another. Perhaps some of them do, but that is not my concern. All that matters to me is the small and sombre-faced man in Cardinal's finery, who is even now dismounting from his servo palanquin to address the crowd. He stands upon a battle-mented stage of address, 22 feet above his flock. From his armoured lectern spread the golden wings of the Aquila. From within its core is projected a potent protective force field. That will be no obstacle. Ecclesiarchal crusaders with blades and storm shields guard the foot of the Cardinal's stage. Adeptus Sororitas line its wings, bolt guns ready and eyes vigilant. High overhead, gunships of the planetary militia prowl as watchful shadows against the evening sky. Kastak lies at the very heart of a war zone. The Cardinal must be protected at all times. They cannot protect him from me. Only he can do that. As Zhenguai clears his throat, grips the edges of his lectern and glowers down upon the crowd below, he has no idea that this sermon is also his testimony of defense. In this moment, I am not Karun Shasi. I am not an assassin of the Vindicar Temple. I am merely a conduit for the Emperor's judgment. If Zhenguai speaks falsely, it is the Emperor that will strike him down. My body, my rifle, will be his instruments. It is unusual that I should have to wait in this fashion. My victims are normally corpses the moment they present themselves to me. Of course, normally, my masters are already certain of the target's perfidy before I am dispatched. Cardinal Zhenguai is different. This is not some doing of the man in himself, for the Cardinal is hardly unique. It is instead a facet of the war zone within which he delivers his sermons. For here 3 competing creeds collide until it is difficult to distinguish diabolical heretic from loyal zealot. Thus I have been given a most unusual charge in the execution of this mission. I must listen to the Cardinal's address. I must gauge for myself whether he speaks the true word of the Emperor, or whether his message has been tainted by either of the 2 deviant Xeno creeds proliferating through this subsector. Others have tried and failed to discern heresy in this man's preaching. Yet still, suspicions remain. He is a powerful orator. He is beloved of his flock, such that they would risk being trampled by their peers simply for a sight of this man that they hail as a saint to be. If he truly preaches the Emperor's will, then this man is surely as much a conduit for the Emperor's will as am I. If, as some fear, he is subtly and cunningly tainted, however, then his every word is another drop of poison into the ears of the masses. If that is so, then it is my duty to silence him. He speaks, and as his words boom from lion-mouthed loud-hailers at either side of the stage, so a hush falls up across the crowd. I too am silent, silent as the gargoyles in whose midst I wait. I listen to the words of this supposed holy man, and I wait to see how the Emperor judges him. His sermon floats up to me, captured with such clarity by my mass audio receptors that I might as well be stood at the Cardinal's left shoulder. He speaks well. He preaches of enemies without, of vigilance towards enemies within. He speaks of the perils of the alien. He speaks of the heresy of unbelief and berates his audience for their capacity to harbour sin. He demands more of them. They listen, rapt, and I truly believe, as much as I can give any thought to the existence of secondary presences, that they will seek to follow this man's instruction. As he speaks, I access microscopic neural augmetics within my cerebellum, surgically inserted there for this mission. I bespeech their machine spirits to sift through the hundreds of thousands of hours of vid-captured footage, audio thief recordings, and inquisitorial transcripts. They do not infect my mind with heretical dogma that has been painstakingly loaded into them. Instead, the microcogitators absorb the sermon being delivered below me, then compare and contrast each of the Cardinal's utterances with heretical speeches and sermons they contain. One, I know, has been tainted with the deviant ramblings of the Tau Empire's credo of greater good. The other contains the poisonous oratory and deluded scriptures of the cult of the Star Children, those who willingly pollute their bodies with the xeno filth of the great devourer. I feel a muscle beneath my right eye tick as the process continues. It is a minuscule motion, yet I loathe and resent it for the enormity of its implications. It is proof that, at present, the cleansed and honed machine that is my mind suffers the presence of things unclean. I look forward to the moment when the micro-augmetics can be purged, and my body restored to absolute spiritual purity. However, as my temple master is so fond of repeating, needs must. Cardinal Zhengwei speaks on, unaware that a microgram of pressure from my trigger finger is all that stands between him and annihilation. As he preaches, so my cerebral augmetics return their findings. They do so carefully, delivering each matching phrase or line of dogma sufficiently censored and shorn of context, so as to prevent any risk of corrupting my far too valuable mind. Yet for all this, I see a tapestry of similarities weaving together before my mind's eye. Serving a greater cause appears to be a strong theme in the Cardinal's address, and of course on the surface he speaks of the Emperor. Yet the Tau Empire prate of their greater good, even as the gene-stealer cults offer all they have to their unclean Star Children. This correlation is inconclusive. The augmetics next warn me of more than 100 points of linguistic correlation between the Cardinal's words and the notion of the tyranny of truth. The Imperial Creed is the one true religion in the galaxy. All other belief systems are false. Their adherents at best deluded fools, but are more likely dangerous deviants who must be excised from the Emperor's realm. All know this. Yet as I watch the data points weave together, I see that this belief too runs deep through both Xeno creeds threatening to corrupt the peoples of Kastak. This correlation then must also be set aside. So it continues. Vigilance against enemies of the faith, the absolute right to rule, surety that this creed is the one true solution to the galaxy's ills, surety that only by this path can humanity be saved, while all others will lead mankind off a precipice from which there can be no return. One belief system and another blend together, until I can perceive only one truth. All other creeds extant in the galaxy have stolen their tenets and their convictions from the word of the Emperor. All are but hollow echoes of his. But what then of the mark below me? The Cardinal's sermon is building towards its conclusion, and, despite subjecting his words to cogitational analysis that would shame a war room's worth of intelligence operatives, I can be no more certain of his allegiance. Were he speaking openly of casting off the chains of imperial oppression, or converting to the worship of the greater good, then the matter would, of course, be easy. Were he so brazen, then none of this would be required, save my presence and my bullet. Perhaps, were my cerebral augmetics permitted to present me with more explicit examples of the correlating language or imagery, I would be able to better distinguish. But no, that would present an unacceptable risk to my sanctity as an asset of imperial judgment. Transfixed beneath the gargoyle's gazes, I hold my body in absolute stillness, my weapon in absolute readiness, even as my mind races to process all that I have seen, heard, and learned. The fact is that, heretical though many might call such an assertion, the different belief systems espoused by Imperial, Genestealer cult, and Tau preachers cleave so closely to one another that without certain explicit utterances, they are nigh impossible to prize apart. No wonder this war zone is such a convoluted mess. In the end, my decision is simple. I cannot rely upon empirical evidence to condemn, nor to save the man I have been sent here to kill. My mortal senses, superlative though they may be, are still fallible. They leave room for doubt. I have been placed in an impossible position by those who should have known better than to corrupt the perfection of my service to the Emperor. I am rendered unable to deliver a final verdict. Only the Master of Mankind can do that. If I am unable to deliver verdict, then the act of judgment has been taken out of my hands. I am returned to my true purpose, merely a weapon, a focus for the Emperor's judgment. He would not have placed me here now without reason. The Cardinal must be corrupted, whether by one alien creed or another. He is condemned in this moment by my mere presence. My finger tightens slightly on the trigger. The rifle twitches minutely in my grip. Its tremendous recoil restrained by technology so sacred that I could not even begin to comprehend its deeper mysteries. Below me, upon the stage, the Cardinal's sermon comes to a sudden end. The Emperor's judgment has been delivered. Doubt is a sin that cannot be borne. Yang Wei will preach no more. The Verothian Uprising. In the bowels of Verothian's high cities, Genestealer cultists of the Pauper Princes stirred. They faced not one challenger for their world, but two. Alien interlopers beguiled the human elite, hoping to seize the planet. This could not be allowed. Verothian belonged to the Star Children. The Pauper Princes were not ready to rise, but they had no choice. These were dangerous, confusing times. The powers of the Dark Gods were palpable. In opposition to them were Verothian's ruling elite, the oppressors, whose deluded holy men preached louder and punished harder. Then the arrival of the Tau changed everything. Their presence threatened to shift the balance of power and destroy the oppressor hierarchies that generations of Pauper Princes had worked so devoutly to infiltrate. The Tau had to be stopped, and to do that Verothian had to be seized. All true believers knew that the Star Children would reward the Pauper Princes for their efforts, and that any hardship was worth that prize. The tendrils of the Pauper Princes' gene sects reached throughout Verothian, from hive sumps to spire tops. Yet theirs was not the only influence undermining loyalty to the imperial oppressors. A new cult had emerged and was rapidly spreading, dedicated to what it called the greater good. They too spoke of unity, of deliverance that would come from the stars. This cult had also recruited members in echelons of power. To many of the Pauper Prince's primacies, they represented a considerable threat. Varothian's internal politics became embroiled in tense struggles as agents for both the greater good and the Star Children vied for supremacy in debates about whether or not Varothian should welcome the Tau. Using their already tight-clawed hold, the Pauper Princes won the fraught diplomatic battle. Miraculously, the Star Children had blessed them with more Maguses than ever before, as if they knew that their worshippers would need such help. These individuals had inveigled themselves into the upper strata of Varothian's elite, infiltrating councils and official meetings. Now, they used their psychic powers and domineering oratory to persuade their colleagues that an alliance with the Tau Empire was not in the planet's best interests. In the aftermath of the Great Rift's emergence, the Magus' powers had become even stronger, and they exploited these boons from the Star Children to the full. They took over the minds of many officials, casting vital votes or making rousing speeches. Where necessary, the Maguses sent the Sanctuses to those who could not be convinced. Meanwhile, from the toxic sumps of the hell of the filthy sewers, from hot manufactoria to claustrophobic hab blocks, the Pauper Princes prepared for war. Biophaguses implanted more and more of the populace with gene-stealer germ seed, knowing that aberrants will be needed in their thousands in the wars to come. Tales of great masked heroes and liberators with legendary marksmanship spread throughout the underhives, stirring the oppressed masses against their overlords. Sanctuses did their bloody assassination work day after day. Priests of the Imperial Creed were discovered by their acolytes with their throats slit. Astra Militarum officers dropped dead mid-briefing after being struck by silent and toxic needler rounds, and many shift leaders and bureaucrats simply vanished. Everywhere the Pauper Prince's agents worked, they saw traces of the interlopers, from cheaply printed tracts on an empire of unity to hyper-technological devices hidden in jewelry. As the Pauper Princes learned more of this so-called greater good, they could not fail to notice the similarities it bore with their own creed. The differences revealed its falseness, however, and the Pauper Princes showed many of those misled by its teachings the true way. By convincing their rivals that the multi-limbed Tau Va they followed in fact represented the Star Children, the Pauper Princes lured many to their own cause. Clamavus's read scripture and promised brotherhood, telling tales of prophecy fulfilled and legendary uprisings. Some, not persuaded by the Clamavus's impassioned preaching, were instead brought into the fold by the clarity of the Gene-Stealer's kiss. The Tau themselves were nowhere to be seen, unaware of how some humans had interpreted the Tau Va, and unwilling to endorse those interpretations they did know of. When the Tau's offer of friendship was rejected, the aliens began military action. Coordinating extensively with followers of the greater good on Varothian, they struck primarily at the planet's principal hive, Vemerus. Many of the lead attacking cadres expected to be welcomed by their allies on the ground, enabling a rapid insertion. They were wrong. Defensive gun battery crews, though loyal, had in fact turned to the Star Children. Their deadly salvos shot numerous Tau gunships and transports out of the sky, sending burning wreckage crashing into Varothian's densely clustered hab blocks. Many Tau that successfully deployed were ambushed as they embarked from their transports. Fire warriors and crisis suits cut apart as waves of hybrids and aberrants descended upon them in a predatory frenzy. Not all of the Tau were so easily overcome, however. Those who were part of the Fourth Sphere expansion had little care for any expected human welcome and made assault landings regardless, conducting detailed drills. These Tau cadres cut down hundreds of rushing cultists with precision pulse fire to secure a beachhead. Fifth Sphere cadres with particularly aggressive commanders also made successful landfall, though all were immensely hard-pressed. The veil of secrecy that the Pauper Princes had fought hard to maintain until this point was lifted. They now made themselves known to Tau and oppressor alike, and their full uprising was impossible to hold back. All across Zemeris, the true colours of dozens of Zorothian defence regiments were revealed. Thousands of troops carved a bloody path through barracks and fortifications, cleansing them of any personnel untouched by the Star Children's beneficence. Brutal hand-to-hand combat broke out between the belligerents, soldiers who had only hours before been allies stabbing bayonets into each other's guts, or throttling their former comrades on the blood-wet iron floors. The murderous Underhive, always a place of wanton violence, became a scene of total war. Icons raised high, cultists surged through hive slums and manufactoria under the guidance of their primuses and nexoses, the tactical genius of their leadership far in excess of that of the gangers and enforcers standing against them. On every level of Hive Zemeris, conflict raged. Vorothian Fusiliers clashed with the brothers of the Blooded Helix and the disciples of the Coil in the galleries of Pacon, the vast exhibitions of priceless art and artifacts playing host to acts of terrible bloodshed as clawed-limbed beasts wielded powerful mining tools as weapons. Such was the ubiquity of the cultists that the Fusiliers were forced to use flamers to burn them out, putting to the torch relics thousands of years old in their efforts. The air was choked with the fumes of burning promethium and cultist corpses, but the brothers and disciples were tenacious. Again and again they attacked, slaughtering thousands until the hollowed-out shells of the galleries were finally seized in the name of the Star Children. The Great Garden of Syphax, a huge verdant landscape, somehow preserved on a polluted world by unknowable ancient technology, was turned into a hellish quagmire as Goliath rock grinders and other vehicles of the Iron Worm Earth-Eaters clashed with the Syphaxian Ornard's armoured companies. Sentinels were shredded by the Goliath's drill dozer blades before being crushed beneath the mining vehicle's heavy tires, but the Genestealer cults were not without significant losses of their own. Countless hybrids were eradicated as their vehicles were turned to little more than metallic mulch by the melter cannons of fast-moving devil dogs. The battlefield itself was an enemy to both sides, the fighting having shattered micropipes siphoning industrial runoff away from the Great Garden. Hundreds of vehicles fell victim to the thick mud churned up as a result, their crews drowned as they were sucked into its stinking depths. Tau forces continued to strike amongst the chaotic warfare that had consumed Zemeris' every level. Though they had failed to gain a true foothold, they were a thorn in the Pauper Prince's side. Their forces were adaptable, motivated and fast-moving, and their weapons were powerful. Streams of repeating pulse weapon fire consumed swathes of neophyte hybrids, while lethal fusion technology simply erased Aberrants from existence. In this fight the Tau were prepared to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Imperial garrison, though few expected the Alliance to survive the defeat of the Pauper Princes. All of these battles were secondary, however. One target above all stood out to the Pauper Prince's patriarchs. They had to seize Zemeris' primary generatorium. Whilst this remained in the oppressor's hands, power could be denied to many of the Hive's regions, including those fully in the Pauper Prince's claws. The Primuses could not countenance such a vulnerability, which, if exploited, could result in the murder of millions of their kin and the failure of their uprising. Hundreds of thousands of cultists attacked, led by a Patriarch and a number of Maguses. The Generatorium was a huge complex of raging furnaces, thrumming reactors and rapidly spinning turbines. The oppressors were fully aware of its vital importance, and the regiments defending it were amongst the finest on the planet. Its workers, who lived in densely packed hab blocks on the Generatorium site itself, were themselves hardened people from whom the oppressors recruited a tough and uncompromising militia. The Pauper Prince's first steps were to isolate the Generatorium. Distraction attacks were launched all over Zemeris to further divide the enemy. These diversionary actions meant that when the attack came, it was all but impossible for Imperial relief forces to make it through. The Pauper Princes assaulted from every direction, Clamorverses spurring on the cultists to attack with unbridled ferocity. Squadrons of captured Leman Russ battle tanks assailed gates and walls head-on, battle cannons roaring. Such actions distracted the defenders, while pure-strain Genestealers scuttled out from sewer drains and disused service tunnels to cut down the foe in droves. Using their immense dexterity to scale defences and buildings, no human was out of their predatory reach. it was of paramount importance to the Primuses that the Generatorum was captured in as intact a form as possible. Not only would this safeguard their own holdings, but it would enable them to control power levels in those areas of the hive that remained under Imperial control. The Nexoses, formidable tacticians and fiercely intelligent, feared that the Imperials might utilize the Generatorum's self-destruct function to deny the Pauper Princes their prize. Ahead of the uprising, some of the Generatorum's human workers had been inducted into the cult and had managed to infiltrate the site's hierarchy. At the desired moment, those hidden agents struck down their former colleagues with concealed blades, or opened crucial passageways to allow Sanctuses and the Kelomorph into secure locations. Wherever the Maguses walked, Imperial troops attacked each other, their minds seized and forced to carry out terrible acts of treachery. Many others were left dumbfounded, sent into trance-like states that left them as easy prey for cultist troops, who ripped them apart with wicked claws and talons or gunned them down in cold blood. With their newfound power, the Maguses imbued their followers with incredible strength. Cultists overpowered defenders at every turn, with even neophytes capable of wrenching arms from sockets and punching straight through flak armor. Zemerus's Generatorum fell. Every one of the Pauper Prince's many arms had played a key role in its downfall, demonstrating perfectly the power of the Star Children and the blessings they bestowed upon their offspring. With this victory achieved, the Pauper Princes rapidly increased the ferociousness of their war to seize Zemerus, and the last defenders fell scant months later. Whilst this in itself was a remarkable feat, many highs still stood across Vorothion, some in the hands of the Tau Empire, others still in Imperial control after throwing down the uprisings they faced. A number of these fell in a matter of days, such was the Pauper Prince's prevalence. Others fought on, selling their lives dearly. Genestealer cult agents of all kinds had been galvanized by the challenge ahead, carrying out their gods-given task with great fervor. Nonetheless, the Pauper Princes had much work left to do to bring about the arrival of the Star Children. In harmony restored. Formidus Prime Hive burned. It rang with the cacophony of war. The ground shook until shattered glass jingled and rubble danced. Lasguns screamed and autoguns rattled out their staccato war cries. Artillery sent rhythmic thumps and booms echoing between the tall flanks of ruined hab blocks, as though along man-made canyons. Smoke filled the air, billowing through the district's rubble-strewn streets, from the blazing wrecks of ground cars and blasted mining vehicles. Yahweh cradled his pulse carbine and made himself small behind the cratered remains of a drywall. The Tau gun was a reassuring presence in his hands. It was obviously and infinitely superior to any Imperial technology that Yahweh had used during what he thought of as his old life. It hummed quietly to him, its machine spirit calm and harmonious, so unlike the belligerent ghosts within Imperial machines. "Oh, but you can be wrathful when you must, can't you?" he whispered. Just like the Tau themselves, he thought. Not peaceable cowards, but not murderous, wasteful zealots either. They won't shy from fighting, but their first recourse is always words. And when they kill, it is for the greater good. The thought centered him further, filling Yahweh with the sense that he was fighting for righteous masters and a righteous cause. That was good, he supposed, because today it seemed like he was going to die for them. "Fireteam 7, report," came the voice of Guiyu Shena, his fireteam commander, in his ear. She spoke through the small, smooth Vox earpieces that Yahweh and all his team wore, another Tau technology, again far superior to the lumpen Vox sets relied upon by the Emperor's soldiery. 7-3 here, came Nauri's reply through the bead. 7-5 reporting, said Tala. 7-8 here, Yahweh added in a low voice. He didn't know how close the enemy might be, and had no desire to give himself away. Several seconds of Vox silence followed Yahweh's words, and his heart sank further. Only 4 of them left now that the rout was done. Worse than he'd feared. From the oath she breathed before speaking, Shena felt the same. "We command the souls of our fallen to the care of the greater good. In death may they enjoy the harmony we are all denied in life," she said reverently. Then her tone hardened as she pressed on. "Does anyone have any eyes on the enemy? Did they follow us?" "I don't think so. They were still busy with the Genestealer cults," said Tala. Yahweh knew how the big man felt. This war had been hard enough when it was just the Imperials they had to worry about. When the Genestealer cult rose up from the mines and sewers, they had plunged Formidis into absolute anarchy, and the neatly ordered plans of the planet's Guevasa liberators had collapsed. The only consolation, as far as Yahweh could see, was that the sudden rising had given the Imperials as much trouble as the Guevasa. They have the numbers to plough on regardless, though, he thought sourly. Not to mention the stringent willingness to feed men and women into the meat grinder until victory's won. Such mindless slaughter wasn't the Tau Empire's way. Thus, neither was it the way of the Guevasa. Still, all the guerrilla tactics, feigned retreats, and sudden ambushes in the Empire didn't look likely to win them the war for Formidis. "You see the burned-out Grand Car by the corner of Herald's Way and the thoroughfare Angelic?" asked Sheena. The survivors of her fire team confirmed that they did. "Rally on that point." And Yahweh felt a faint stir of hope at the determination in Sheena's voice. It was banished a second later, as combat aircraft shot overhead, fast and low, and left a rippling string of detonations in their wake. Fire rose beyond the ruins in a nearby street. Human voices screamed in terror and pain, and Yahweh had no idea whose side they were on. Heart thumping, he forced himself to lunge out from his meagre cover and run, doubled over, through the remains of whatever home or business this had once been. It was so blackened and blasted he couldn't tell. Rubble, glass and bone crunched under his boots. Drifting smoke turned his breath ragged and wheezing as he ran. Yahweh clutched his Tau gun tighter. He expected at any moment to feel the sharp burn of a lasbolt hitting him, or to be smashed from his feet by the pummeling impact of autogun fire. Neither came. Instead, Yahweh slid into the shadow of the wreck and was swiftly joined by the last members of his fire team. Nauri, slight and wiry, was formerly a dust cleanser from the Midhive guilds. Tully had been a manufactorum labourer from Smelter's Falls, until he heard the message of the greater good. Sheena was stern-faced, short-haired, and still boasting the granite-hewn build that life in the planetary defense militia had given her. They all held Tau guns. They were all scorched and bloodied. They all looked scared, but fiercely determined. "I've heard from Fire Team 4 and Fire Team 2, said Sheena, and Yahweh's chest unhitched slightly. The thought that they might be facing this alone had frightened him badly. They rallied in the Aqua Processor Shrine just north of here. Lighter casualties than us. "Not difficult," said Nauri, expression grim. "I've also had word from Shaper Kangok," said Sheena, a note of savage satisfaction creeping into her voice. "He and his entire tribe are pushing up from Sector 18. Kroot! They'll put the fear of the Tau Va into those bastards," said Yahweh, feeling a vicious delight of his own. The ferocious and cannibalistic Kroot repulsed him, or at least the ignorant imperial part of him, that even years in service to the greater good couldn't wholly expunge. Still, so long as the aliens were tearing the enemy apart rather than him, then Yahweh was more than happy to call them allies. "Not unless we can hold the Imperial push long enough," Sheena replied. "Spotter drones confirm multiple armoured squads amongst the Vostroyan advance, and if they make the triumphal way before Kangok can get his tribe across it, they'll turn the place into a shooting gallery." "Can we stop the tanks?" asked Tula. "The drones have identified weak points in the armoured seals at the rear of their turrets and engine shrines. Pulse rounds should punch through with enough persistence," said Sheena, unslinging a heavy canvas pack from her shoulder. "Also, there's these." Carefully, almost reverently, she spilled a small cluster of orb-like devices from the pack. Each was the size of a human fist. "Electromags, spirit banishers," said Nauri, wide-eyed with recognition. "That's right. We don't have many, so for the love of the greater good, don't waste them," replied Sheena, as she rationed out the Tau grenades. Yahweh attached his 3 electromagnetic pulse grenades to his belt, with the same care he'd once taken handling his machine-stamped triptych of the Emperor, the Primarch, and the High Lords. "Not just us handling them either, is it?" Yahweh asked. As a fresh squall of gunfire erupted from the neighbouring streets, he heard harsh voices bellowing wild slogans as explosives crumped, and automatic weapons thundered. "Down with the Imperial oppressors! Slay the unbelievers! The Star Children are watching! Ascension is at hand!" "Those deluded lunatics might actually be of use for once," said Shenna. "They can shout about their heretical gods all they want, so long as their guns do the work of the greater good. Now let's go. Yave, your point. Get into the ground floor of that hab block and find us a solid firing position that we can flank the Vostroyans from." Yave saluted and set out at a jog, hearing the scuff and clink of his surviving comrades as they followed close behind. In the smoky shadows of the bombed-out hab, through blasted sleep cells and the burned-out remains of communal rooms, Yave ignored the sprawling bodies and bone-white grins of skulls. He ignored the sick thump of his heart and the ashen dryness in his mouth, praying fervently to the greater good as he pushed down his instincts and ran towards the sound of ferocious gunfire that grew louder by the moment. He reached the front of the building and found it half collapsed. Daylight and firelight blended into red-gold bands that swirled with smoke where they cut through the gloom. Yave ducked in behind the fallen and decapitated statue of St. Truculus, the Unwilling, and got his first proper look at the fighting in the street below. Hard to believe that an hour ago our defensive line had a firm hold of this sector, he thought. The blasted remains of the Gavasa defensive positions were still visible amongst the rubble and ruin, as were the strewn bodies of those who had sought to hold them. They had put up a fierce fight against the Vostroyan advanced elements, but when the Genestealer cultists had emerged unexpectedly from Sector 12, the Gavasa had found themselves pinched between the stolid, well-equipped Vostroyans and the rugged mining vehicles and mutant fanatics of the cultists. The results had been as predictable as they had been bloody. The greater good can still prevail, thought Yave, as he watched fur-hatted Imperial guardsmen pouring las bolts and heavy weapon fire into the advancing Genestealer cults. Mining trucks exploded as they were pierced by missiles or riddled with armor-killing shells. Demolition charges and the beams of mining lasers answered, hurling loyalist bodies through the air and reducing ever more Vostroyans to corpses. As his ear caught the bow-loosening rumble and squeal of advancing tanks, Yave turned to stare down the street. Even as the first Leman Russ hove into sight through the smoke, it fired its main gun. The shell whipped down the street, leaving coiling trails in the smoke behind it. It bit deep into the hull of an armored prospecting buggy, then detonated. The vehicle's torn remains cartwheeled through the air and crashed into the ruins, close enough to make Yave hiss with fear. More tanks were moving up now, grinding over rubble and bodies, rendering all beneath their tremendous weight to pop. Mustachioed commanders leaned from their turret hatches, pointing and yelling orders as they eyeballed their targets. More thumping booms, more whistling shells and fiery blasts, and now the tank's heavy bolters were opening up too, with a relentless chug that shook Yave's lungs. "Oh, throne," he breathed, forgetting himself. A quick guilty glance revealed that his three comrades looked as horrified as he, and had fortunately missed his slip of the tongue. Old habits die hard. The Genestealer cultists should have been withering before the firestorm. Instead, they redoubled their efforts. Missiles flew from shoulder launchers, and suicidal cultists hurled mining charges at the tanks, before bolt shots turned them into red mist. Explosions rocked the battle tanks, shredding the right track from one and setting another ablaze. Still, they came on. "Enfilade fire! Now! Now! Now!" shouted Shenna, as the tanks drew near. Yave forced his might to unlock and his limbs to work. He raised his carbine, sighting as best he could on what he thought might be welding seams on the turret of the nearest tank. The pulse carbine sang as he fired it, each devastating bolt of energy leaving the gun without the slightest recoil or heat. The shots flew true despite Yave's fear. Though they would have cored out a Space Marine's chest cavity, the pulse rounds only splashed from the Leman Russ's armor with harmless futility. The others joined him, their fusillade forcing the tank commander to duck back into his vehicle with a cry of alarm. Tuller hurled an electromag, and it discharged with a throbbing crack that set lightning spirits dancing across the tank's hull. More pulse fire was whipping down from somewhere above, the other fire teams adding their strength to the attack. A Leman Russ shuddered to a halt, smoke spilling from its engine shrine, while another's hull gun cut out in a shower of sparks. Yet to his horror, Yave realized that all the combined fire of the Gavasa and the Genestealer cultists was only slowing, not stopping, these armored behemoths. One tank rotated its turret. Shots sparked from its armor as it elevated its barrel. The vehicle bucked as the gun spoke. Yave didn't see where the shell hit, but the hail of pulse fire slackened suddenly and horribly. He would have felt more sorrow for the deaths amongst the other fire teams, except that the nearest tank was traversing its sponson heavy bolter directly towards his own. "Down! In the name of the greater g—" Fire exploded and Yave's entire body clenched with the expectation of death. Again, it didn't come. It took his bewildered mind a moment to process the fact that it was the Leman Russ that had been blasted suddenly and violently apart, and not he and his fire team. Yave blinked stupidly, then gasped in amazement as he heard the distinctive whip crack of railgun fire. Another tank jerked, then detonated, the blue after-image of a railgun round piercing it through and through. "The Tau! The Tau have come!" cried Nari, jubilant. As another tank detonated, a voice came through Yave's earpiece, and a glance at his comrades showed him that they were all hearing it too. The voice spoke human words with the hard, slightly halted cadence of the Firecast, but its message was unmistakable. "In the name of the greater good, all alien auxiliary forces advance and present yourselves. The Sakya Sept are here to end your struggle in the name of the greater good. Advance and present yourselves." Nari was already up and running for the street, firing her pulse carbine into the retreating shapes of panicking Vostroyans. Yave followed. Shenna and Tala kept pace. As he emerged into the open, the smoke whirled and blew away in rolling banks, thrust aside by the downdraft of powerful engines. He looked up in awe as the silhouettes of 3 immense Manta missile destroyers bellied in low and rained repelling fire upon Genestealer occult and Imperial forces alike. Swarms of micro-missiles burned through the air and detonated in pinpoint clusters. Battlesuits descended on bloods of jet propulsion, their Firecast pilots guiding them into land with metallic clangs and the whine of powerful servos. "For the greater good! We fight for the greater good!" cried Nari. That was when they shot her. The last blast came so suddenly that Yave was still processing what he'd seen when the battlesuit swung its Gatling laser and scythed more shots through Tala. The big man went down, half his head missing, his blood misting the air. "No, no, we're Gevasa! Gevasa!" cried Shenna, her expression crumpling from elation to horror, even as Yave cried out in dismay. Shenna brandished her gun as proof, but the only answer she received was the blast of the battlesuit's flamer. Yave reeled back as his fire team leader and friend of almost 5 years transformed into a raging torch before his eyes. His mind screamed in bewildered protest. He tried and failed to understand what was happening. Had this battlesuit pilot gone mad? Had the enemy done something to the sacred Tau technology? Some insidious haunting that allowed them to control the suit from within? Yet no. As he staggered and stared around, he could see more Tau firing upon Shuk Gevasa as they emerged from cover. Nearby, he heard the crack of Kroot rifles and the alien mercenaries' harsh shrieks as their former allies butchered them. Shaking his head, tears squeezing from the corners of his eyes, Yave dropped his gun and stared in bewildered terror at the battlesuit as it stalked towards him. "Why?" he sobbed. "What did we do?" "The greater good is sullied by your superstition," came the pilot's harsh voice through his battlesuit emitters. "You must be purged, that it may be cleansed." "Purged?" said Yave, in abject horror. "Cleansed." He had heard words like that before, but never from the Tau. When they kill, it is for the greater good, he thought again, trying and failing to understand. It was his last thought before the battlesuit's guns let fly, and he joined his fallen comrades in the harmony of the greater good.